Right, folks, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Tapas. And I think we're going to get started here. Today's topic will be Markdown. And Markdown is something that will allow you to perhaps expand the range of where your science goes. And if this is something new to you, I'm happy to have you on board. Seems like a couple more people are joining in. For the people that are joining in, again, today is going to be about Markdown. This may be a new topic for you. If it is, great. If it isn't, I hope that this may be a good refresher. This is part of our data tapas, where we do cover bits and pieces of what is around the world of data science that maybe people not get to use every day. First of all, I would like for folks to please check in if possible. So there is a QR code right on the screen. And if you don't want to use the QR code, here is the link that you can use in the chat itself. Give you a few seconds to get that out of the way. And with that in mind, I am going to switch over to the materials of the day. I'm going to paste it in the chat so people can get to follow alongside the notes themselves. Quick check-in, you can do this with raising your hand or give me a green check mark or a red check mark if you haven't. Who here uses Markdown? Give or take. Okay, I understand that. I understand that Markdown is a language that a lot of people may know, or a lot of people may not know. But in my experience, when I didn't know about Markdown, I felt quite limited to the things that I could show on the internet. But then all of a sudden, hey, I can. What do you mean I can change the text however I want it on my website? And an example of everything Markdown is what we are showing right here. All of the text that is shown on this page is Markdown. If you are taking the FOSS or FOSS Plus courses, all of that text is in Markdown. And what I want to achieve here is to get people to know about Markdown a little bit more and to hopefully use it for your own website or for your laboratory's website or for any project that you're working on. Before getting started, this should not be such a long lesson. We are going to cover the basics of Markdown and see if we can get something started here. And the first thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is what is Markdown and why it is called Markdown. Well, the etymology of Markdown comes from markup, and markup, if you are not familiar with that, is what people used to, well, mark up old documents, such as this one right here. I mean, at this point, we have all submitted a number of texts that have been modified throughout time, where people go through a red pen. This is right, that is wrong. I would like for this to be larger. I would like for this to be removed. And essentially that act is called act of marking up. Popular markup languages are LaTeX, HTML, XML, and Markdown itself. If you have not used LaTeX, well, LaTeX is used quite heavily in writing manuscripts. I mean, right now we are looking at a web page, and this web page is rendering in HTML, which uses the Markdown in the back in order to format the text. But really, why should we care? Well, I asked myself that question, and I asked myself why I learned Markdown. And it's essentially because it allows for my science, it allows for my laboratory to reach out to people that are outside of my immediate surroundings, such as through GitHub. GitHub allows me to host all of these texts, but all of a sudden, if I want to point out a specific word in italics, if I want to assign a specific link, I need to know how to use Markdown. And Markdown is a communication tool that happens between me and the computer. And more importantly, it has to be lightweight. The importance of it being lightweight is because all of a sudden this entire page is a lot less heavy than, for example, your Word document, because we all know Word documents can get quite hefty the more text there is, and they use their own version of markup. It is proprietary, it is not open science. However, we do apply some of that formatting to, for example, Google Docs. However, for website maintenance, like it's happening in GitHub, we do need to understand how Markdown works. There is a number of other websites or platforms that use Markdown, such as GitLab, Stack Overflow, Read the Docs, Slack. If you use Reddit, Reddit uses Markdown. If you know about Jekyll, then Jekyll uses Markdown. And the point is, we want it to be lightweight. We want it to be open and accessible. Some popular examples of websites that use Markdown, I find myself finding Pandas. If you do use Python a lot, you may have gotten into Pandas. And Pandas is essentially an open source library that helps you with data structure and analysis. And almost this entire website has been formatted using Markdown and HTML. This is using a flavor of Markdown called the restructured text, and it's the flavor of Markdown that Read the Docs uses. PyTorch documentation is another quite popular library for deep learning, and this entire website is hosted by Read the Docs, and it's written with Markdown. So Markdown is a language, a communication tool worth knowing if you do plan to reach out with your science, because that's where the science is going. It's open science is getting hosted on the internet, and we need to understand a little bit how to communicate the science using the Markdown communication tool. Oh, yes, there was also the Data Lab website. It's hosted on the GitHub pages, and it uses a flavor of Markdown called mkdocs material, which, again, it's an extension of the Markdown form. This is quite bare, but all of this is using Markdown in order, and HTML in order to render the way that it is rendering. So I'm going to close this tab right here. And I wanted to introduce Markdown itself. Markdown is a lightweight markup language, or well known as LML, created to be quickly learned and deployed, because quickly learned from us and quickly deployed in a sense that we can understand it, and the computer can understand it as well very quickly. It has been released in 2004, and since then, So many more variants of Markdown have been made available. One of the more popular ones is the one that we're seeing here, which is the GitHub flavored Markdown. And what we have seen a little bit earlier was the read the docs. So read structured text Markdown, which uses Markdown Extra, but a lot of these are almost interchangeable apart from some for some details between one and the other. Today, we're going to focus more on the GitHub version of Markdown. And if you do want to work on your Markdown code offline, then you use, then it will require using the extension .md or .markdown, and this is how you save them. I think if you use, for example, a Mac, you can open this using your normal text editor, but otherwise you will require to use a specific program in order to modify a Markdown file. I like to use Visual Studio Code because it comes with a lot of other tools that allow me to work in Python, that allow me to work in other languages, and not only Markdown. The most useful guide to Markdown, and where a lot of today's material comes from the markdownguide.org. And the markdownguide.org is everything Markdown. This is, I believe this website itself may be hosted on Markdown, but I'm not sure. But the Markdown guide gives you a substantial introduction to Markdown, including giving you the syntax guide, a cheat sheet, more Markdown through extended syntax. And what does that mean? Well, if you want to look at it, we can look at it together. So for example, how to deal with tables, which I find that to be more important than just extended, or use of emojis. And hopefully today we'll get to that point. One thing that I don't think I will have time to cover today is using HTML to improve on the Markdown of a specific page, because Markdown is a communication tool between you and the computer, but the computer takes that input and puts it into the language of the internet, which right now is HTML. So if you directly use HTML and the syntax of HTML, then you have a quote unquote hack where you bypass the conventional Markdown laws. And for example, you are able to center a picture, which, believe it or not, it's really annoying when you try to do it in Markdown. It also gives you a list of popular tools that support Markdown for editing if you don't want to use if you do not want to use VS Code. I believe that at some point I used CodeMD before I realized, nah, I can just use VS Code for this. But here is a list of so many tools that support Markdown. Today we're going to be using HackMD for some back and forth formatting, as well as back and forth interaction. So I'm going to talk about HackMD in just a second. Okay. The rest of today, now that I've spent the first 14 minutes talk a little bit about the history of Markdown, will be trying to go through a number of small exercises to show you a little bit how Markdown works. So I'm going to share with you a URL, and this is a link to HackMD, and it is up to you whether you want to follow along or not. Whichever works is for you, it's fantastic. And what this link should lead you is this page right here. What you are seeing, I don't think you require an account right now, but what you're seeing right here is a really powerful tool that shows you on the left the raw markdown and on the right the rendered markdown. I'm sharing this link with you so that you can go ahead and perhaps go and, you know, create your own lines. Excuse me, there is this in the way. I'm going to move it a little bit. You can go down to line 30, and over here, this can be someone's space other than mine, and just call onto your space. I'm just going to use line number 1, and this I'm just going to say Michele's space. But if you look at Brandon on the right, he's already he's already cementing his own space. I have the notes open on a different window right here so that I can see what is going on. Feel free to follow along. Otherwise, you can, so feel free to follow along with the notes, or you can use your space to do whatever you want. And first of all, I want to point out one thing, that, well, this is my space, but there is so much space between me and Brandon's and Rai's, and all of this space is not being read, or it's being compacted. And that is one of the strong characteristics of Markdown, which is if you do have empty space, it's going to cut it short. Nowadays, I think texts are able to do that, but it's just worth pointing out. Syntax error in text. Ah, there we go. Mermaid version 10.4. I do not know what's going on over there. What's going on over here? Oh, you're trying to make a mermaid diagram. You see, you're jumping ahead a little bit, right? Because I am not sure mermaid diagrams work here.
Yeah, no worries. This is really cool. This is a really cool service though.
No, for sure, for sure. We do use it in order to keep notes in some of the lessons that we do. But mermaid diagrams, they are extended Markdown. So it will work, for example, in, I believe, MK Docs and Jekyll, but shouldn't work in raw Markdown that is right here on the HackMD. So good try, good try. Okay. With that in mind, I wanted to, well, start with the headings. The headings are important because, well, the headings give you a header. When you start writing a paragraph, you want to have chapter 1 and maybe a second heading on what the chapter is about. So how do you define a heading? A heading is defined with a pound sign, and the more pounds you do, the smaller the heading. A single pound sign will lead to a really big heading, whilst 2 pound signs will lead to a smaller heading. Chapter 1, section, section 1. And a 3 pound sign, guess what? Is gonna get even smaller. I'm reading what Rai has to say. I have to head to another event, but this is really informative. Looking forward to seeing the recording. No problem, Rai. We will have it up by next week, so don't worry about spending some time with us. If you gotta go, go. And have a good afternoon. Subsection, because subsection 2 or subsection 1 actually, and so on and so on. But I do want to point out that there can be up to 6. So I'm just gonna, excuse me a second. Oh, Oh, stop doing that. Okay. Subsection 1, subsection 1, even smaller subsection, and the last one, this is level 6. There is nothing smaller than level 6. So I never find myself going below, I will say, using 4 pound signs. And I think that's a little bit of a best practice, because that kind of allows you to think, okay, how do I want to structure my paragraphs? How deep can I go in the rabbit hole? And I suggest using 1 to 4, maybe 5, but not really 6, because at this level, if I am just to write text, all of a sudden my normal text is just bigger than my level 6. So all of a sudden I'm having to redefine what and to what level I want to have my headers. So right here, I'm going to make a note that this is Michele's, I'm gonna say hard, I'm gonna say soft stop. This is where I prefer stopping. But this is how you create headers, and headers can be anywhere from chapter, the beginning of chapters to beginning of sections and subsections and whatnot and whatnot. So obviously headers are not the only thing that's in a book or in a write-up. The next thing that happens is the write-up itself, which is the text. If I'm just to write text, then I want it to be in paragraphs. Well, this is a sentence. Fantastic, great, nothing wrong with this sentence. If I want to create a second sentence that is separated, I am not just going to be able to have a single space. This sentence is the next sentence, but there is no separation between the two. It will require for me to add 2 breaks. It requires me to add 2 line breaks to create a second paragraph. There we go. Paragraph. Okay, there we go. If I were to put 3 line spaces, oh, there we go. Here are 3 line space, but it's still going to be reading this as a single line break. So the rule is if there is no separation, then it's not going to separate the sentences. You need to have at least 2 line breaks between the two. I do want to point out that in GitHub, I believe doing a single line separation like this will not result in separation between the paragraphs. You will have to have a hard 2 line separation. But that does not seem to be what is going on in HackMD. And as I mentioned earlier, there are changes between various Markdown platforms, and it's worth knowing which platforms you want to use or what the goal that you want to have. So right now we are running on the rules of HackMD. So let's play with these rules. There is also a different way to create a line break, and that is by using the HTML BR. Notice how this is still in the same line, but here I am typing. Here I am typing on the same line. However, it is rendering as a different line. And I can add BR, and by the way, BR here means break. I can type as many BRs as I want, and let's just say that I put in 3 BRs. This sentence will render in with 3 line breaks. Knowing BR or knowing the HTML for BR is kind of like knowing the absolute basics of what of HTML. If you don't know anything, for example, in command line, then I will suggest the first things that you should know are ls for listing everything inside a folder, cd, changing directory. But for HTML, the absolute minimum that I will suggest knowing is knowing how to use BR. And with this in mind, now that we know how to create paragraphs and create chapters, we can actually go ahead and work on the emphasis of specific words. For example, if I want a specific word to be bolded, this word is bold. I need to wrap this, sorry, this sentence, not this word. Yeah, I need to wrap this specific sentence in 2 asterisks. As you can see on the right, all of a sudden you have a bolded sentence. I then can use a single asterisk on both sides to show, okay, use 1 asterisk to show a sentence or a word in italics. And lastly, if I want both, I will then require 3 asterisks on both sides of the word or the sentence. 1, 2, 3 on the end, and then I can go to the beginning and put 3 at the beginning as well. As you can see here, it's both italicized and bolded. This is not too deep or too difficult of an exercise, but sometimes people forget. So it's worth going through these various exercises. The next one that I want to show is going to be block quotes, where, ooh, what are you trying to do, Brandon? I'm not hearing you, so I don't know what you were.
It does. I was gonna try to be annoying and put blink HTML, but I don't think it works.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, HackMD is funky sometimes, but it does work, and when it does work is useful. You can try on the on GitHub. It probably works doing blink on GitHub. Let me see. Yeah, you were definitely trying to be annoying over here with the blinking. It doesn't work on GitHub as well, I think. Or I may have not been, sorry, I'm on a different page here, but I may be doing it wrong as well. Okay, so the next thing is I wanted to show you how a block quote works, and that is starting by using a single bigger than sign. Using a bigger than sign, will create a block quote. Quote, not quite. And the thing is, if I were to add a second bigger than sign, why does it disappear? And a third bigger than sign, then I can make whole sentences within a blocked quote. And guess what? I can have as many bigger than signs as I want and just say this is a very nested quote. I can go back and add more quotes to the ones before. As you can see, then it travels following along the blocking convention. I don't really like using the block quotes in either the GitHub flavor of Markdown. I'd like to, however, use something called admonition in the MKDocs Markdown material because it gives a little bit more emphasis. I wonder if I can show you what it looks like. Oh, no. What are you doing? There we go. MKDocs material. Here we go. Just putting it on over here. I like the admonitions on here. This is the MKDocs material reference page. And for example, using 3 exclamation points and writing note, it will create a nice little note admonition where you can put everything you need. But then it's not only notes, you have things like note, abstract, info. It comes with really colorful messages, and that's what I like to use. I don't necessarily like the GitHub or HackMD way of creating a specific note. So that's why I like to use, this is one of the features that I like to use in MKDocs quite a lot. And I do suggest people to learn a little bit of MKDocs. It's just prettier and keeps things a little bit more tidy. Regardless, moving on to the next little bit.
So, is there a way to unblock quote? Because I'm like, in mine, I'm stuck. I seem to be stuck in block quotes.
What happens if you add an extra space between the one above? Because it should be. So for example, excuse me, if I were to just press enter, yeah. I don't know why it would put it right into the. My best guess is that, as you can see, the more you nest, the less you can unnest, which is, between you and I, frankly, not nice, because that doesn't make sense. But otherwise, excuse me, I'm going to press enter over here.
Yep, go for it.
And it seems like you may need to create that structure that you want to see. I'm learning something too. So yeah, if you do not want a block quote over here, you might need to press enter and then is out. Okay, I'm learning something. I don't know if this works in GitHub itself, but it seems that MKDocs at least follows this convention. So cool. Something new that I know. I can see that you do know a little bit of your of your HTML, so you are already way ahead than everybody over here. Okay. Where am I? Okay, so lists are something that I got myself around on, knowing that were a little bit annoying to learn in the beginning, because, for example, I now want to create a list. In order for me to create a list, I would require to put, for example, 1, and I'm going to create an ordered list. And an ordered list will be, instead of using 1 or a, we'll just be using a dash, a star, or an asterisk. Sorry, a dash, asterisk, or a plus. And this is going to be my first item in the list. I can just press enter and then 2 should come up automatically. The second item is automatic. This is the second item. The second. Okay. The number 2 after you press enter should be created automatically. Woohoo. And same can be said for number 3. And what happens if I were to press tab here? It will create an indented list. And then it will continue from number 3. I do want this to start from number 1. And as you can see, if I do set number 1 again, it starts to go back to number 1. However, if I decide this to be 7, let's remove the 4, it will pick up from 7, 8. 8 was automatic, and 9. And let me see, if I were to put this in the beginning, it will go back to the earlier convention of 1, 2, and then the next number 3. So 9, this is not a 9. And this does not render as a 10. So I strongly suggest when you create lists using Markdown to kind of be careful with what number you start, because that has there were issues in the past where I ran into creating lists, numbered lists, and not being able to format it the way that I wanted. If I were to take a complete break and start for example, number 10, interesting that it goes back to number 1 again. Maybe what if I put 2 spaces? This is, it's fine that it just goes back to number 1. It should pick up. There we go. So if I create a separation, and I'm using BR to create a separation, then it picks up from number 10. This is the real number 10. Or to press enter, it then continues with 11. Lists are a little bit tricky. 11. I'm just gonna leave it 11. Order lists are a little bit tricky. Unordered lists are not, because you can use them. You can start with minus, unordered item 1. Pressing enter creates the second minus. But I can also use plus, unordered item 2. And instead of a plus, I can also use star. Indented item 3. And then so on and so on. Unordered lists are a lot easy. Just know, I didn't know this until I started using Markdown quite often, that I can use either a minus, a plus, or a star. And this is just me, but I do prefer the minuses. I like to go in and change the pluses or the stars to minuses. So if you see someone changing your your unordered list, it's probably me. What else was there that I wanted to cover? Right, images. Images are another item that are a little bit tricky. And right now, I remember for this specific case, I did use the Wilbur and Wilma picture from the U of A website. So I just had to go and get a URL. This is the image that I used in the examples. So if you do want to use the same, I'm just going to post it in the chat. If you want to use something else, please go right ahead. In order for you to call on a specific image when you use Markdown is by following the next convention. You need to use a exclamation point. Oh, look, it already tells us what convention to use, and that is the exclamation mark followed by text within a square bracket followed by the URL itself. The URL itself lives in the round brackets, and this can be empty, but this is essentially where you put the name of the picture or the name of the image that you want to use. Creating this picture does not necessarily mean that it sends you to the picture itself. Like if I were to, let me see what happens if I were to open image in a new tab, it will open the image. But I want this image to send me to a website, for example. Let's say that I want this image to send me to the alumni.arizona.edu. So the first thing that I will need to do is to copy this URL. And I will be copying this. Oh, excuse me, copying this and pasting this. And what I need to create is to create a square bracket containing all of this, and then create a second parenthesis field where I can go to the URL destination and paste it into the parenthesis. Sure, now we have two pictures, but the first one will open just the image itself, whilst the second, if I click open link in a new tab, will actually take me to alumni.arizona.edu. And what we did here was to wrap the image into a redirect where we add the desired URL within the parentheses. So all of a sudden, the image can take us where we want to go. We're going to be seeing this very soon because we can do the same thing with text. Text doesn't do anything. But if I were to wrap it in the same convention as above, then it should redirect to a specified URL. So I am having to wrap this in square brackets and then opening up a couple of parentheses as you, oh, what's going on over here? No, excuse me. What's going on over here? Is it seeing my text? There it is. So as you can see, the text is being highlighted. However, if I press something, if I press it, nothing is going to happen. I will need to put in the URL of choice. And now this text should redirect me to the same page that we have selected over here. Blew my mind when I learned about this. It's quote unquote basics for me now, but it blew my mind when I first learned about this. The next thing that I want to show you is how to write code or how to put code inside a specific page. And code is written using ticks. And right now, there is nothing in here. But if I were to say, for example, import using Pix, and let me see if I can do this. No, yes. This specific symbol right here. That is, oh, okay, hold on a second. Let me see if I can do this. There we go. So this is another important thing. If you just want to show something outside of Markdown, you can put a backslash against it and it will not render, or it should not render. And all of a sudden I can just show you the character without invoking the character's markup power. So I wanted to add a dot over here, and I wanted to add single ticks around a specific code. And let's say this is an example. As you can see, it does render in a different font. It does render in a different syntax. And, you know, you can use this in order to write code that is in line of code that is in line. But how do I write code in code chunks? Well, you do so by using free ticks at the beginning and free ticks after. And all of a sudden, I am writing a chunk of code. Import numpy as np and so on and so on. So using free ticks at the beginning and free ticks after creates a line, and sorry, it creates a chunk of code. I do not know if HackMD has the abilities of doing so, but if you were to type in, for example, Python, all of a sudden it will render, it seems like it's doing so, it will render that specific chunk of code as that specific language that you are trying to evoke. So right now in Python, as you can see, the import statement is rendering as I expect. If I type in bash, then nothing happens. If I type in, what else is there? JSON, then it doesn't render as because this is not JSON. But if I were to type in Python, then the Python stuff is going to render correctly. So if I were, for example, let's study np dot well, there's nothing else right here, so it's better for me to stop trying to come up with random code. But again, free ticks followed by language of choice, and as you can see, it gives you some other choices as well. We talked about how to link things. Oh, yes. One thing that we did quite early on is to do this. And what free dashes do is that they create a separator. You can do this as many times as you want. It does not work with pluses, it does not work with equals. However, as you can see right here, using a number of equals under a number of characters, it does highlight and create a second heading. So using equals under a specific sentence or word creates headings. And I think this is only like for the first heading, so the level 1 heading. Let me try using this creates a second heading. Yeah, so this is for heading level number 1, and the single dashes are for heading number 2. Just gonna go ahead and make a number of headings right here. Lastly, for today, again, we're not going to go into the HTML today, apart from BR, I guess, is how to create tables. And tables, well, they are a little bit annoying to create, but they render quite well. Tables require to have a heading. So for example, let's just say that we want to create a 3-column table. 1, 2, 3, 4. You will require space 1, space 2, and space 3. You see on the right, nothing is happening. And if I were to add 3 more spaces below, nothing is happening. But as soon as I added the dashes, at least 3 dashes below, I think it's, can I only add 1 single? Oh, all right. Well, cool. Fantastic. If I add just a single dash, it creates a structure, and that is the heading structure in a specific table. That means that, for example, if I want to say, experiment 1, data point 1, or experiment, data point, and let's just say result here. Just simplify it to data. I can go ahead and add to the structure that I'm creating. So experiment, I'm just going to say experiment A, data point X is coming out with result Y. As you can see, I can go ahead, and this is how I add rows to my specific table. Experiment B, we had X data, but the result came out with W, and so on and so on. One thing about creating these tables is that if I use, for example, colons, either to the left or to, let's go over here to the right, it creates a handedness in that specific row. For example, in this row, in this column, I believe I said something wrong earlier. But if I were to put 2 dots here, then it creates a handedness to the left. And if I were to put 2 dots here on the right, it creates a handedness to the right. If I want things to be centered, I can put columns at the beginning and at the end of my dashes, and this makes sure that things are put in the centered, as we can see right here. I can also create empty rows and empty columns, and I can do that by adding a single empty column. Make sure that there is a dash over here, and I can do the same with the rows themselves. I can just leave them empty, and this will create an empty row and an empty column. It allows to give a little bit of breathing room if necessary. What else did I want to add? Oh no, hold on. We did cover the various okay, we did cover tables. It's 11:54. I do not want to jump into extra information, but I do want to bring you to a list. Excuse me. We are going back to the data tapas, and I have to scroll all the way down now. And I do want to show you the resources themselves, because these get to be quite useful. The first is the Markdown guide, which I have opened already. And I want you to look at, for example, at hacks. And hacks, these are a good way of learning how to indent a specific tab using characters that we have not looked at, how to center, and this is, Brandon was doing this earlier, center using HTML. Image size, image captions, for example, these get to be quite useful as well. You have to create a whole block, essentially, of figure, and figure caption, with the caption right in the middle. and we can't use the Markdown syntax anymore. We actually have to use the HTML syntax. So I just wanted to show you other conventional methods to create centered images or to create figure captions, and also admonitions. Apparently, it shows you that you can use emojis, and if you just Google emojis Markdown, it will show you all of the supported emojis that are out there. And I did add a link to learning about how restructured texts work, and you can go ahead and open up the Read the Docs page, or we have seen this, the MK Docs SquidFunk reference material. If you do create a website using MK Docs hosted on GitHub, all of a sudden you can do all of the pretty things that SquidFunk has created for us, such as this is what Rai was creating earlier, a flowchart, or what did he try to, or what SquidFunk called it, a mermaid chart. So this is all examples of Markdown text that has been enriched. And if you already know Markdown and want to know a little bit more, I do hope that you can spend some time on the list of the resources that we have added here at the bottom. With that in mind, I am going to stop the share.